Go. Many of us have a whole range of personality traits here. In the main, they tend to be okay, but these things can be taken to extremes, and we end up with having what's called personality disorders, which, if not managed correctly, can wreak havoc on your business as well as your next big win. So join me in a few seconds after some heart-pumping music, where me and my good friend and business partner, Joe, are going to be discussing personality traits from the humble to Jekyll and Hyde. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be with you in a few seconds. And as they say, in all these good things, we're back in a room. Good evening, Joe.
Yeah, good evening. And can I just qualify something and maybe challenge something a little bit that you said in the intro? We're not talking about personality disorders, right? Because they are, which is, I think is what there's a slip of the tongue, and I don't think that's what you meant. So personality disorders are obviously, we're not medical psychiatric people. And that's over there. I think we're talking about personality quirks, traits, behaviours that may serve us really well or don't serve us well at other times. I
think you're right to point out that we're not medical practitioners. I deliberately put that disorders in there, by the way, because based on a Harvard Business Review study from about 20 years ago, when they investigated personality traits and clustered them, they're saying that those, if not managed correctly in the workplace here, can actually have an impact in terms of your leadership, decision making, and the like. So, but you're right to point out that we are not suitably qualified. So, folks, if you are listening to this and thinking, they've just intimated that I have this personality trait, if it's serious, please go and seek expert medical help.
Yeah. So, because personality disorder means something very specific in medical world. And we're just talking about, day-to-day decisions, behaviours, actions, those sorts of things. I'm really glad we straightened that out.
We're going to have the NHS helpline, calling us and say, what are you doing?
No. Just think no. So it's just this is about the way we are, and it's about some self-awareness too as leaders, really, because I think it's really easy when you're running a business and you're the boss and it's your company and all of those things, who is there to keep us in check? Who is there to hold us accountable for the decisions we make, how we're behaving and all of those things? And if we don't put things around us to help us with that, sometimes, our personality, our choices, our traits can get in the way. And there is some very good research, including, if I may say so, my own PhD stuff, which shows that actually if we can cultivate some traits, then they will help us be successful in business and achieve our next big win. So
we're going to come back to this, the learned Dr. Joe later on, because I'm intrigued what's in her first chapter of a PhD. I think that it's an interesting point you raised about self-awareness there. I read a study, I think it was first published in the Harvard Business Review, that was saying that apparently once you get to about your 30s, going beyond that days, it becomes more difficult for us as individuals to become self-aware of what our personality traits are, whether they're actually having a negative impact or our general personal traits. So there are ways that we can actually get some self-awareness. There are ways that we can get some, dare I use the word, understanding and diagnostic of what our traits actually are. And in some situations, these traits, and we're going to probably look at those in a few moments, if they're not handled correctly, can be very impactful negatively, but actually in other situations, they can be a force for good as well.
Yeah. Let's start by defining what we mean by a trait. Because a trait for me is a repeated pattern, behavior, trend, something that we do over and over and over. So a personality trait could be that every time we're under pressure, we do this, or every time we're frustrated, we behave in this way, or every time we're excited, we do these things. And so it's things that are part of who we are to an extent, but there's this distinction, I think, between those traits that we learn and those traits that are actually in our DNA and part of us, and that's interesting as well. And then there's how those traits evolve over time. So when you're listening to this or watching this, let us know what you think, but have a think about how this relates to you and your leadership style, and because it can be quite illuminating to start to unpack all of this.
In your sort of earlier research, Jay, did you ever come across Robert and Joyce Hogan?
It's not ringing any bells, but go on.
No, it's really picking up on what you were saying. And they were saying that in terms of those traits, those characteristics, those behaviour, they came up with 11 traits, and they then clustered those into 3 groups here. So there was if I make sure, the distancing. Those are the traits that, in general terms, not make people not connect with you. So they're quite distancing by its very nature. Then there's the seductive traits, which is made up of 5 individual traits which attract people to you. So whether you talk about like strong, charismatic leaders, and then there's the what do they call it? The ingratiating ones, which have a negative impact as well. So it's quite interesting they're doing that, and they'll say that in general, human beings typically have 3 or 4 of these traits. In the main, they're not necessarily harmful here, but again, if they're not managed correctly or we're not made aware of them, for example, typically like that bold characteristic where somebody's very confident, that they're very impactful, that can be really great in an entrepreneurial setting. But actually, when you're managing a team, that may not be such a good positive thing when the business is settling down a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot that's been written and researched about personality. The number of studies are, it is huge. I think some of the most accepted frameworks or models around personality are things like the Big Five. So, and in terms of my own research, there are some of the Big Five personality traits that have a direct correlation with successful entrepreneurship. So they are things like levels of neuroticism. So that sounds like a really big word, doesn't it? And we're worried all the time. It doesn't necessarily mean that. It just means how much are we concerned? How much do we worry? How much energy do we expend? Then you've got introversion versus extroversion, and the distinction here isn't like I'm the life and soul of the party or I'm really shy. It's extroversion means I get my energy from being with other people, from thinking out loud, from having, from externally. And then introversion means I get my energy from reflecting, having time to myself, working on my thoughts, and actually towards, it's about being able to be extrovert at the right time. Can you hear the rain?
I can hear the rain. We've stopped here because we're in the sunny Midlands. But it was very wet Midlands about an hour or 2 ago.
It's absolutely hammering it down here on my roof. So I'm hoping it's not interfering with the sound. Another trait is around how agreeable we are. So there's only 5. I think we're on number 3. It's agreeableness. And actually, it's from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's being able to switch between being agreeable when we need to be to get people on side, and then not worried about being agreeable when we need to challenge or where we need to, defy the naysayers and make our belief happen, and drive things through. So that there's things like that, and there's lots of discussion around what we're born with and what we learn to do from other people along the way. But actually, we can learn to grow and develop and shape our traits through neuroplasticity as well.
So why we've got 3 of them? What's the other 2 that you're referring to?
So the acronym is OCEAN. So you've also got sort of openness as well. So openness is around, are you open to new ideas, different ways of thinking, and so on. So, I mean, there are many different types of personality models, but I think what's really, really cool is to just really think about yourself and just ask yourself the question, what helps me be successful? And is there anything that I'm doing repeatedly that might just be getting in the way of that success? And is there something I can do with that? And that might be changing your behavior, or it might be that you bring in somebody else who, has a flair for doing that thing. So if you don't feel like I don't feel like I'm great with people, I'd rather be doing technical things. Maybe you need somebody in your business who is great at building customer relationships, for instance, and vice versa.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think there's some truth in that thing that as we get older, we're less, as a general statement, less self-conscious, less self-aware about what our own traits actually are. We create a model in our own minds about what we are like as individuals. Secondly, I suppose our work colleagues and the people that we work with may not necessarily feel that comfortable about actually giving that feedback of the type of traits that we might possess there as well. Things like personal development reviews, those bi-yearly exercises as well. Some people say there's a school of thought that actually you should canvass your friends, your family who know you pretty well, and actually take that feedback. But however you do that, I think you do need to get some internal self-assessment as well as some external contributions, but you've got to be receptive to taking on board that feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in terms of the big five, I've given you four. The fifth one is conscientiousness. So how diligent are you? And it's about being, again, it's all about being diligent enough, sticking to the rules enough, but also being prepared to break the rules and to break diligence where it's appropriate to do so in order to create something new. Sorry, just to finish that. And it's about the right things at the right time. Now, I discovered something, or I didn't discover it, right? I learned about something today.
What was that?
I bet you know about this, actually. Right. Have you heard of Crystal Knows? Knows. Have you heard about it?
I don't think that sounds familiar to me.
Right. What it is my understanding of it, bear in mind this is hot off the press, only learned about it today.
Okay.
It's an AI tool that you can use as a Google Chrome extension that you plug into LinkedIn, or it plugs itself into LinkedIn. So you log in, you have it as a Chrome extension. And when you log into LinkedIn and you're on Google, it reveals the personality profile of the person whose LinkedIn profile you are looking at and have open at the time. And it gives preferences in terms of email, meetings, engagement, discovery, negotiation, closing, all of those things. And you can get 9 profiles free. Now, I've used that, right? I'm not saying everybody should go out and stalk everybody and look at, but I've used that to look at what my profile is.
How accurate is it?
It is scary. I mean, the stats say when I've very briefly looked into the research on it, that it's 80 to 90% accurate. For me, it was for my own, it's bang on. And what it's doing is it's reading the LinkedIn things you're posting, things that people are saying about you, the resources you're sharing, your tone of voice, how long things are, all the things. And then it's saying, this is how to work best with Joe. Here are some things to do, and here are some things not to do. And it's free, and you get 9. So, right, I don't think we should go out and look at everybody's profile or anything, but maybe you and your team could do it. It uses DISC profiling methodology.
I mean, as an intriguing for exercise, isn't it? I mean, what it's suggesting is that you can actually formulate an opinion about somebody's characteristics, their personality, not necessarily by talking to them directly, but by other extraneous evidence, like what they're writing, the style, the words, and therefore I would imagine the more data it's searching, the more accurate the profile will be, which ultimately means that you can't actually truly hide your true personality.
Yeah, and it's and I think what I'm advocating, I want to be really clear, right? Just for everybody listening and watching, I'm not suggesting you go out and you try and psychoanalyze everybody through this AI Chrome plugin. what I am suggesting is that if from a leadership perspective, maybe you're in a small to medium-sized business, you want to learn more about yourself and see yourself through a different lens, this is something you can do. It takes seconds. It's free. It's from, and see what you think. If it's inaccurate in your view, try it out, ask a few people what they think. And does this sound like me? Yes or no? But you've not lost anything. And it's just, I think using things like this and asking the people around you, as you've said, Mahmood, can be really insightful.
I'll be interested in your feedback later on about if you show that profile to John, what he says about the assessment.
Yeah, I mean, I shared it with somebody I was working with, and she was in stitches. She's like, oh my goodness, this is, some of the things it said it would do, I'd actually used those phrases in our, before in our conversation that day. It was really spookily accurate. And so because of course as long as we're doing our own stuff, right, and we've not got people writing it for us, but how we show up online is how we want to be perceived. It's how we want to do business with the world. It's how we want to interact. There's lots of information we're putting out there about ourselves, which is
absolutely
good. Anyway,
it's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, however you do that assessment, I think you need to get a handle about what you are like, what your traits are. You need to have a good overall assessment there. It's interesting. When I was doing some prep for this show, which I occasionally do, I was looking in terms of saying that in certain situations, a certain style, a certain personality trait, certain whatever personality cluster you are, serves it well. So, for example, somebody who's very bold, somebody who's very outgoing, somebody who's very attracts people here in a risk-seeking environment where risk is probably part of that startup phase here. That's probably a good leadership style to do. When it comes to actually the downside of that is that recklessness and that sort of gung-ho risk-taking can be quite devastating as well, because you tend to have a lot of focused energy and power in one individual there, which is not challenged there. And that could be quite downside. And by the other extreme, somebody who's very diligent, meticulous here, what that can do, that can stifle innovation. That could be a very risk cautious approach. There's a technical term which my brain has gone to sleep on here, and that could be quite poor. And it's suggesting that if you are going to modify or change any aspects of their personality, there's a couple of things to take into board. Number one, it's difficult. Nobody likes to actually go through the process of change. We like to be changed. Another thing is our brains are mentally, they want to conserve energy, and that having that big major change in your behavior does suck a lot of energy. We're going to be careful not to slip back into old habits.
Yeah, it takes practice, doesn't it? But I think that the key is to all of this that it boils down to one thing, because we can dissect personality traits, behaviors in many, many different ways, but it all comes down to emotional intelligence. And for me, what emotional intelligence is that firstly, to be aware that we are thinking and feeling things, experiencing emotions all the time. Being emotionless is an emotion. We need to then be aware, and this is all very micro in the moment, we need to be aware of how that's affecting our behaviours, our decisions, and our actions. If that's helping us and it's contributing positive things towards the situation, jolly good, keep going. If it's not, we need to switch that up and just pivot in the moment and get our brain in the right place to do what we need to do. And then when we've done that, we can then better read others, we can communicate more clearly, and we can have a better impact overall. And part of it, so the core of emotional intelligence is that self-awareness, which is why we've got our quiz on our website, actually.
Do you want to point to that quiz? Is that the quiz that's on the nextbigwin.co.uk by any chance?
It is on the nextbigwin.co.uk, and it's your Next Big Win accelerator. So it takes literally a few seconds to do, and then you'll get a summary of your preferred style and how you can use that and leverage that, and maybe add a few things in to help you get to your next big win faster and better.
Nicely segued. Question for you then. So if we're connecting this personality traits to your next big win, how that might potentially accelerate it or ruin it, are there any for you personality traits that are detrimental to getting your next big win before we talk about the ones that will help you there?
Yeah, I think the ones that are detrimental are, firstly, well, I'm going to stick it as inconsistency. And under inconsistency, I think there are a few bits to being inconsistent. And that's giving up too quickly, not staying the course, not continuing to maintain momentum, being attracted by the next shiny object over there. All those things are bundling into grit or inconsistency.
No, I'd agree with that. What about for yourself then? I'll share some of them. That ones that you think in the toolbox of personality traits are good ones to have.
Good ones to have are to be open-minded. I think when we're closed-minded and we think we know everything and we've got it all sorted, thank you very much, nobody can teach us, anything, or when we'll only learn from certain people, I think that closes down opportunity. And as we said before, having the idea is to an extent the easy thing. We've then got to be creative and consistent and resilient about how we deliver that idea and make it work commercially. So I think being open about how we do that, there's more than one way, is really important. What about you?
I think it's probably a variation of that. I think that of being bold. So where you are superbly confident and overtly here, I think that can trip into arrogance here, and I think that can blind you. So I think in one respect you need it, because you need to be driven, you need to have aspirations, and even if a lot of people are saying it's not going to work here, we've seen make great examples of what brands we're used to now, where because the initial founder says, I've got a vision, I believe this thing can work, and they've got to that end point here. But obviously it's not without its cash, it's not without its risk. So I think being too blind, not actually taking on board, is something that's a very detriment there as well. I think in terms of the other extreme is being reserved, where you're actually indifferent to other people's feelings. And I think that if it's just you and you don't rely on anybody else to get your next big win, maybe you can get away with it to some extent. But I think if you've got people around you, suppliers, team members, workers, employees, staff, whatever, then I think that being skeptical, or I would say also probably what I would call the passive aggressive style. Well, the one thing you vocalize an emotion and say, this is what I believe, but the reality is you don't actually believe in that. And I think that can be quite destructive.
Yeah, it can, can't it? And I think as well in terms of personality traits, it's really important to leverage strengths in other people. I know some people that think it's a weakness if they can't do or aren't perceived to be able to do everything themselves, and if they're not good at everything. The reality is very few of us are very, even heptathletes or decathletes, there's usually one or two events that, they even triathletes, right? Some are better at the swim and, not so bothered about the run or whatever it is. So that even if we're pretty good at most things, there'll be some things we're better at than others. And, acknowledge that, embrace it and go, this is who I am. These are my strengths. I'm going to play to those. And here are my less good areas or less preferred areas. And I'm going to get some help with those wherever I can.
I think that's a great point. I think it's not really courage, but it is quite courageous. I think more people have a tendency not to admit there are bits that they're not comfortable with, they're not actually au fait. And I think trying to, that old thing about a little knowledge is a dangerous thing here. Sometimes you have to be honest with yourself and actually accept there are certain elements here that your time is best spent on that activity and not all the activities there as well. And it can be a false saving as well. If you think you're trying to save on budget, if you're trying to minimize the impact in terms of resources, you actually end up, it's going to probably cost you more in the long run anyway.
Yeah. And, I'm finding that I'm coming more and more to terms with this, the more experience I have, is that we can't please everybody all the time, and we're definitely not everybody's cup of tea. We will, but we'll be most people's cup of tea, hopefully, but not everybody's going to like us. I work with thousands of people every year, and I get feedback on every event that I do. And the vast, 99%, like seriously, high 90s%, great, really engaging, and occasionally I get, very occasionally, a random comment, which is, I don't like her at all. And then when that's explored, it's just, well, she didn't do anything wrong. It wasn't bad. I just didn't like her. or I've had, she's not my cup of tea. Yeah, okay, that's all right. So, and I used to worry about that and think, how could I be everybody's cup of tea? But of course, ain't going to happen, is it?
No, absolutely not. And actually, I think it's probably a sign that you're doing things well if there are occasionally people who don't necessarily, view you as the same as everybody else here. Because, and especially I think if you're working in a mixed group there, so, and I think even within families, isn't it? You've got such different dynamics going on. Even in business, you've got different dynamics going on as well. It doesn't mean you're not actually going to get occasionally upset by somebody sort of vocalising an opinion, saying they don't like you, or they don't actually agree with you fully %. I think the key and the balance is not to personalise that and take that internally as something, let that actually sort of seep in to your consciousness. It just happens. You can't please, and if you try to please everybody, you end up pleasing nobody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes we need to think about the people we like working with and the people we don't, and the people we're comfortable with and who we aren't, and not just dismiss or devalue people because they're different from us and it feels like harder work. I think look first to see if they're, where the value is in us collaborating or working with those people. If there is no value, if there's a minuscule value and it's just such hard work, it's not worth it, that's fine. But sometimes I think we let the personality thing get in the way, and let's try and get past that and find the space where there's mutual value for collaboration, if possible.
It's interesting to say that, because I think that's really an ideal, and I think that's a great way to actually look at it in terms of how we want to conduct ourselves here. But occasionally, as I suppose, as human beings, even in a leadership role, which can be quite isolating, you're running your own thing. You actually there's a lot of pressure put on your own shoulders there. When you're under stress, when you're tired, when you're not actually your brain's not, so we say, fully functional here, then those character traits, those personality traits can magnify themselves and become far worse than they actually are. And if you're making attempts to, let's say you are somebody who's quite domineering, and you think, right, what I've got to do is to take a step back, let somebody else speak in that meeting, bite my tongue, let other people get that. It's really difficult to do that to begin with, but it gets better. But when you're under stress, you might want to snap and say, I want the answer right now there as well. So, don't beat yourself up too much over it, but changing behavior is a long haul. It takes time.
Yeah, and it can be done as well. I think and by thinking about personality, don't see it as something that and I'm talking about standard actions and behaviors that we do out of habit rather than things that are in our DNA. So learned behaviors is what I'm talking about here. We can unlearn them and relearn them, and as you say, it might take a little bit of extra effort.
Folks, if anyone's listening, if you're listening on and watching on Catch Up Replay, let us know your own thoughts. Do you identify any of the traits that Joe and me have identified? Which ones do you think are particularly good for your next big win, your business? Which ones do you think are detrimental with them? We'd love to hear your own feedback. And if you have taken the leadership assessment, the quiz on the nextbigwin.co.uk, we'd love to know what your thoughts were.
Yeah, and we've got an article which is going live after the show, actually, which has got lots and lots of tips. I think 40 plus tips on how to on traits of being a brilliant leader, and how to, just very straightforward things that you can do to to be even better and be even more amazing than you already are. And you're already very amazing, we're sure.
Absolutely. And I think that's a perfect way to bring things to a conclusion as far as that's concerned. So, folks, listen, we'd love it. Try the quiz on the nextbigwin.co.uk and let us know your thoughts here. Our next topic, watch this space, and we shall reveal what we're going to be talking about next time round.
Yeah. See you soon.
See you soon, folks. Take care.